Hey, everybody. It is Monday, March 10th. We start a new week here on the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Nunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, how was your extra short weekend? We lost an hour.
It flew by. Way too fast, Moshe. How was your extra short weekend?
Everyone beware, by the way. These days as we transition, there tend to be more car accidents, etc. So be hyper aware. Ours was fine. We actually got around to watching one of the Oscar films, actually the Best Picture winner, Anora, over the weekend.
Oh, and how was it?
I thought it was excellent. I thought it would, Alex and I both thought it was really well done.
It's funny because we watched A Complete Unknown, which I thought was excellent. And I was sad for Timothée Chalamet that he didn't win Best Actor.
So after watching that, you thought Chalamet should have gotten it.
Yeah, and then I read about how he prepared. I think he spent about 5 years learning how to play guitar and taking singing lessons. That's a big commitment.
Definitely. Speaking of other things we watched this weekend, we watched the Meghan Markle series over on Netflix. And I decided on the Instagram account. Well, really, Alex did. Alex was like, I was doing commentary while we were watching it. And she's like, I got to record this for Instagram. So if some of you were on the premium account over the weekend, or follow Al, I had some hot takes on that series.
I also appreciated Alex's hot takes, one of which was that none of the food was cooked thoroughly or baked well enough to her liking. And I trust Alex. She's a really, really good cook. I didn't watch the show. I have seen clips, but I'm with her. I'm with Alex.
We had thoughts. Though we did learn over the weekend, they have now given it a second season. Netflix has. So Meghan Markle / Sussex will be back doing her Martha Stewart thing, I guess, next season.
Okay, the TV and movie review section of this podcast is officially over. Shall we get to the headlines?
Jill, before headlines, we should note over the weekend, Saturday was International Women's Day. It fell over the weekend this year, so I just want to mark it here. Happy International Women's Day to all, including you, as the fight for equality continues.
Thank you, Moshe. I appreciate it.
You're an international woman, Jill.
I guess so, Moshe, right? I guess of the two of us here, I should be the one marking the day.
I was trying to get ahead of you there.
All right, so the headlines here. Elon Musk facing pushback from President Trump's cabinet and Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill over those Doge cuts. There are some spats breaking out behind closed doors. What does this mean for the future of Musk's power in the Trump administration? Plus, how popular is Doge or unpopular is Doge outside of Washington? There's been some violent backlash taken out on Tesla dealerships and Tesla owners across the country. In international news, more than 1,000 people have been killed in Syria, many of them religious minorities, in the country's most violent weekend since the Assad regime was overthrown in December. Continuing coverage in the Middle East, Israel cutting off electricity to Gaza to pressure Hamas to release hostages as the U.S. defends its direct talks with Hamas. Back in Washington, Trump's DOJ still says that Google should be broken up and is pushing the company to divest from its Google Chrome product, among other things. And RFK Jr. meeting with major food companies today in what could become an awkward face-to-face with the leaders that he has long criticized for threatening America's health. Plus an update on Gene Hackman and his wife's death. And finally, a very controversial change to the beloved Monopoly game and what our Mo News listeners think about it. Moshe, spoiler alert, they're not happy.
They're not happy. They have many thoughts about what Monopoly is doing in the digital era.
And finally, Moshe has on this day in history.
Your clue today, Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you.
All right, Elon Musk has been going face-to-face with lawmakers and even some inside of Trump's inner circle as the Department of Government Efficiency creates confusion and frustration for cabinet secretaries and voters across the country. Musk's Doge has been making headlines for its sweeping cuts and its break, then fix it mentality. Moshe, break, then fix it is usually what we hear in the tech world, not really the federal government.
No, but he has brought it to Washington, and it's leading to some frustration, especially among the more than 2 million federal workers.
Yeah, it seems things have finally reached a boiling point. Some Republican leaders are pushing back on the mass firings and budget cuts from over the past few weeks. During a cabinet meeting late last week, President Trump telling his cabinet secretaries that they, not Elon Musk, are in charge of making cuts. He called the meeting to address department leaders' concerns with Doge's actions, including the "What did you do last week?" email. We've reported on that here on the podcast. The email asking federal workers to explain what they accomplished in the past few weeks or face possible firing. Many agency leaders told their staff not to respond. Then they eventually told them to respond. Apparently, it frustrated a lot of the members of Trump's cabinet who are in charge of the actual agencies who weren't told about the email before it went out. In that meeting on Thursday with those cabinet secretaries, Trump gave the first indication that he might be tightening the reins on Elon Musk, who, by the way, was also at the meeting. Things reportedly got heated when Musk and Secretary of State Marco Rubio clashed over the closure of USAID. So that's under the State Department's purview. Musk then returned fire, accusing Rubio of firing nobody. A separate exchange between Musk and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy centered on reports that Doge attempted to fire air traffic controllers. Musk said that that's a lie, and he challenged Duffy to name names, to which Duffy responded that there are no names because he had blocked the firings. As mediator, Trump attempted to clarify Doge's role as an advisor to the agencies without final say.
So this was a very contentious meeting, apparently, according to leaks from it. Both Rubio and Duffy challenging Musk there. It appears after that, other cabinet secretaries who are frustrated by Musk didn't want to get into it with him openly there. So basically, Rubio and Duffy were the ones who engaged him. Love the statement from Rubio's spokesperson that came out later on Friday. Not a denial of what took place. Instead, the statement read, Secretary Rubio considered the meeting an open and productive discussion with a dynamic team that is united in achieving the same goal. A open and productive discussion, that is Washington official speak for we really gave it to each other. The big question we have right now is the issue now resolved, or will things keep escalating here? How will Elon continue to do his thing? Trump clearly continues to back Elon. He went to Mar-a-Lago with him over the weekend. The images that just came out Sunday night of them returning to Washington. Who was flying an Air Force One with the president again? Elon Musk, coming down the steps, just a couple steps behind the president. So the Trump-Musk relationship still going strong there, despite some of the frustrations that the cabinet secretaries are having, being like, yo, we run these departments. Like, who is this guy? He needs to have deference to us. These are our employees, and we will make a decision as to what to do with them, not him. And that's interesting because Trump did say on Friday in his statement that he does want the further cuts to the government made with a scalpel, not a hatchet. So clearly more precision there. And if you recall, Elon has been walking on stages with a chainsaw. It might be time for him to break out the scalpel that the president's talking about.
I feel like Elon Musk with the chainsaw is just going to be one of those images that's going to define the beginning, at least, of Trump's second term.
Definitely, if you were to talk about like top 5 images that like reflect the first 6 weeks here, going on first 8 weeks, Elon with the chainsaw.
Over to Congress, some Republican lawmakers also said they want Musk to get their approval before making changes, especially for his budget slashing initiatives. Musk also met with lawmakers on Capitol Hill last week. He ended the meetings by giving out his personal cell phone number so that they could contact him directly if they have concerns. In private meetings, lawmakers also discussed a rescission package with Musk. This would let the White House send Congress proposed cuts, and then lawmakers could codify them with a simple majority vote in the Senate. Rescission allows the White House to officially cancel previously approved funding by Congress. This would be Congress voting to effectively nix money that they had previously voted for or approved. This approach helps address the legal challenges related to the executive branch possibly overstepping congressional authority by not spending dollars. In this case, Congress literally canceling the money that they had already approved to various agencies once Trump and Musk decided that they aren't spending it. Moshe, this was something that I had talked to Ben Sheehan about, who wrote a book all about the Constitution and the checks and balances that the government is supposed to have. Congress, as we know, is supposed to control the purse. And as we've been talking about, the legislative branch seems to keep kind of giving more power over to the executive branch, not just during the Trump administration, but going back decades already.
Yeah, a reminder, Article 1 of the Constitution is Congress. Article 2 is the executive. So these are Article 1 authorities. And the big question has been, when is Congress going to assert itself, its constitutional duties of oversight, especially in regards to Elon Musk and Doge here. And so it appears Congress is like, please help us. We're getting a lot of angry phone calls. We're having town hall meetings across the country. You guys might have seen these images of people yelling at members of Congress. And specifically, what is really grinding the gears of a lot of Americans is Doge, the lack of transparency, and what is happening there.
During the talks, Musk acknowledged that things will go wrong during Doge's efforts. In the past few weeks, essential workers in charge of maintaining nuclear weapons, stopping bird flu, protecting the food supply, and reviewing medical devices were fired and then later asked to return to work. These conversations, both with GOP lawmakers and Trump's cabinet, seem to be an attempt to try to alleviate the tension between Doge and the government.
Yeah, and then beyond all of those firings and then rehirings, there's also been a number of programs that the U.S. Government through USAID has had to track Ebola, other major contagious diseases in Africa. They effectively fired everybody. Now they say they brought the funding back, but Jill, they haven't rehired most of those people. So even if the funding is back, there's nobody to really do the job. Apparently, one of the units had 50 people. Now it's 6 people tracking all diseases in Africa. And the reporting right now is that team is extremely overwhelmed given all of the things they have to track right now. So again, you have members of Congress. These are allies of President Trump. They are rooting on Trump as he seeks to cut here. This has been a dream for Republicans for decades, cutting the size of federal government. The issue they have is the process here isn't ideal as far as they're concerned, and again, feels haphazard. They're taking the hatchet or the chainsaw as opposed to the scalpel. And that's where Republican members are like, help us, help you. And in a number of cases, apparently, individual senators have called Elon Musk being like, hey, did you mean to fire those several hundred people in my state? Because like they do something very important. And apparently in a few cases, Elon has reversed himself on a number of those calls.
Whoops.
That's the thing. You know, if you take a private equity approach or a tech Silicon Valley approach, in some, especially, I should say, Elon Musk's Silicon Valley approach, this is not all Silicon Valley approaches. It's all about like rebuild if necessary, but chop, 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 chop. And we played that bite of Kevin O'Leary recently saying like the government is dripping in fat. There are big fat chickens there to cut, and I think he needs to be cutting more. So certainly you have people on the other end saying he should be even more aggressive than he should be. But the issue is taking a bankrupt company and reorganizing it is very different than like, say, the Department of Energy and how it handles nuclear weapons and diseases that you may want to do cuts, but you want to be more careful because of the role some of those agencies and some of that personnel has. Now, that's what we heard from Washington. The latest polling right now nationally from CBS YouGov shows that 54% of American adults believe that Musk and Doge should have at least some influence over government spending. For the most part, Republicans overwhelmingly supportive of Doge's influence. Democrats, not so much. So there is a partisan divide there. Independents right now are positive on Elon Musk. So for the most part, the polling has shown that people are generally supportive. They have a general feeling that the government is too big, that there is waste. But we'll see here what the potential impact is of some of these mistakes and how these headlines are impacting people out there. Now, as far as impact, that's Elon as Doge. One of his companies, Tesla, has had a rough few months, and it's clear that what's happening politically is having an impact business-wise. For 7 straight weeks now, aligning with the start of the Trump presidency, Tesla shares have declined. They finished down 10% last week, the lowest level since Election Day. Since the stock peaked back in mid-December, it has lost $800 billion in market cap. There have been a number of incidents, violent incidents, when it comes to Tesla. That includes superchargers that were set on fire in Massachusetts, a shooting at a Tesla storefront in Oregon, and a number of other violent incidents where people have taken out their ire at Elon on individual Tesla owners and their vehicles across the country. Law enforcement is worried that these incidents will increase and someone will get seriously hurt at some point here. So you have seen, a number of people calling for boycotts of Tesla. And it is interesting because the typical consumer of a Tesla, an electric vehicle, typically fell on the more liberal end of the spectrum in recent years. Those are the people who tend to get electric vehicles. So it is interesting his move here and the impact it'll have on the company. Though at some point, analysts believe that Musk's bet on Trump here will pay off in the end, given the regulations that he'll be lifting or imposing, that will effectively allow his company to thrive. Some of the stuff that Trump has lifted related to EVs would have made some of Elon's competitors more competitive with Tesla. And so the fact that he's dropped some of these EV credits actually good for Tesla because Tesla has this head start in the marketplace.
Okay, time for the speed read. Let's start with some international news from NBC News. Syria is experiencing the most unrest and violence since the fall of the 50-year Assad dictatorship in December. Over the weekend, more than 1,000 people were killed, including more than 800 civilians, as supporters of the new Islamist regime clashed with pro-Assad militants who supported the former dictator. It isn't exactly clear if those are the only groups who are involved in the fighting or if there are more. There have been reports of executions, firing squads, and bodies piled in the streets, with most of the violence concentrated in Syria's coastal region, which is home to its Alawite minority community as well as the minority Christian community. So the Alawites are a small Islamic sect that the Assad family belongs to, and some of Assad's loyalists have maintained control there even after the December coup that ended with rebel Islamists led by that group, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, taking control of the government. The HTS-led government has reportedly sent forces to that region to try to assert control, and that is what apparently led to the recent clashes. A majority of the civilians killed are believed to be Alawites. Secretary of State Marco Rubio blamed radical Islamic terrorists for the deaths and urged Syria's current leadership to hold them accountable, although it isn't clear which groups he is referring to. The interim president and leader of HTS, Ahmed al-Shara, called for peace on Sunday, and he announced a national committee that will be investigating. He has been actively trying to rebrand himself from an Islamist extremist to someone who will be more accepting of religious diversity than previous leaders.
Yeah, so this is just the latest upsurge in violence here in Syria. Shara, we've told you about him. He was the leader of an al-Qaeda offshoot. He was served prison time in Iraq for attacking U.S. troops, was buddies with Baghdadi, who went on to form ISIS. Shara forms the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, ultimately leads this Islamist group, but recently has been trying to brand himself as the softer, kinder diplomat, shedding his military uniform, putting on a suit, saying that his group doesn't espouse extremist ideology anymore, that killing minorities in the country, like Alawites and Christians, would not happen. And so extremely concerning that this did happen and what this means. For the most part, the people close to Assad, the previous dictator, have left. So I'm hearing from folks that some of the people murdered here by the Islamist group had nothing to do or very little to do with that previous regime. And that's why there's a lot of concern, because once you have this, killing of one group, they want revenge, and the other group wants revenge, and it just continues and begets basically what has been, what are we at this point? 14-year civil war in Syria. So that's a situation we will continue to watch. Meanwhile, staying in the region, watching Israel and Gaza right now, the Israelis over the weekend saying they're cutting electricity off for the main water treatment plant in Gaza. That's after the Israelis have already cut off food, fuel, and medicine and other supplies from entering Gaza. The measures here are to try to pressure Hamas to actually agree to a deal, extend the ceasefire, and actually return the rest of the hostages. Remember, the last ceasefire ended last weekend. The Israelis say in cutting this off that the people in Gaza are fine. They have food, gasoline that'll last them for months based on what has come in during the first ceasefire period. Nonetheless, the U.S. here backs the Israelis and upping the pressure on Hamas. The feeling is that Hamas has opposed the extension here of the temporary ceasefire. Now, Hamas is pushing for the original agreement, which would have resulted in all of the remaining hostages being released, thousands of Palestinian prisoners in exchange, and Israeli forces completely withdrawing from the territory. But for the Israelis, they see that as basically ceding the territory to Hamas, allowing the terror group to continue to lead Gaza here. So there's a lot to negotiate here. Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, he's headed to the region tomorrow. And this is after Trump's special envoy for hostage affairs. This is a separate envoy, a guy named Adam Bowler. We told you about him. He's a former roommate of Jared Kushner from college, worked on the Abraham Accords. He was out over the weekend doing a number of TV shows, talking specifically about the U.S. decision to directly talk to Hamas. Well, we talk about these Israel-Hamas negotiations, which they use third parties for because they don't talk to each other. The U.S. has, after years of saying, we don't negotiate directly with terrorists, are directly negotiating with Hamas. So Adam Bowler was explaining the U.S. position here. Here he is on CNN making a point that Hamas doesn't have horns growing out of their heads, and the U.S. is not an agent of Israel and will do its own thing. Take a listen.
Do you understand why Netanyahu, Dermer, others might be upset?
I do understand. I spoke with Ron, and I'm sympathetic. He has someone that he doesn't know well, making direct contact with Hamas. Maybe I would see them and say, look, they don't have horns growing out of their head. They're actually guys like us. They're pretty nice guys. So he doesn't know me, and there are big stakes. He lives in a country where if it sets certain precedents, then it will hurt or help a lot of other people. So I understand the consternation and the concern, and I wasn't upset. At the same time, we're the United States. We're not an agent of Israel. We have specific interests at play.
So, Jill, what's interesting about that is there are definitely some people on the right who would have lost their minds if Joe Biden, envoy, said, Hamas has some nice guys in it, and we're not agents of Israel. Nonetheless, this is a Trump person. Bowler, seeing all the attention he was getting, made a point of posting on social media last night, I want to be, in all caps, crystal clear, as some have misinterpreted. Hamas is a terrorist group that has murdered thousands of innocent people. They are, by definition, bad people. So he wanted to clarify, after calling them some nice guys in that CNN interview, that they are, in fact, bad people. And he did, I should say, in the rest of the interview, he did make a point of reinforcing that the U.S. And the Israelis are, for the most part, in lockstep here on this. But the Israelis have been very frustrated when it comes to the fact that the U.S. is actually having direct talks with Hamas. But, it appears here, whether we're talking about Ukraine or Israel, that even with, certain allies, fellow democracies, et cetera, the Trump administration is going to do its own thing as it pursues its agenda.
I was watching an interview that he gave to an Israeli media outlet, and the TV anchor was asking him a lot of questions about these direct negotiations and some of the criticism that's come from Israel about the U.S. negotiating directly with Hamas. And if that is some kind of indication that the U.S. doesn't feel confident in the other talks that are going on between Israel and Egypt and Qatar, trying to get to that second phase potentially of the hostage agreement. And he made the point of saying, every day counts here. You saw the condition that these hostages came out in. We may not have 2 weeks. These people are being held in tunnels underground. So every minute really matters in terms of getting out as many live hostages as we can. So we're just doing whatever we possibly can and going down as many avenues as possible.
Yeah, you've seen here, the Trump administration is going to do its own thing, follow a non-traditional route. Steve Witkoff, real estate buddy of Trump's, he's leading negotiations. Adam Bowler, as I mentioned again, Kushner's former roommate, healthcare investment. And so he's going to put non-traditional folks into these roles. And you certainly see it when it comes to the way they do interviews and the way they speak. One of the frustrations I've always had as a journalist interviewing diplomats is how diplomatic they are in interviews. Like, you make no news and you're like, well, what about this? They're like, well, the thing we're really looking at is, and the thing we're focused on is getting an agreement that and you're just like, oh my God, this is like so lame. But I get it, because they're diplomats and they're there not to piss anyone off. So when you put non-traditional folks in those roles, you're going to have some more interesting lines that sometimes require a correction on Twitter. Jill, one other thing I'll note as we leave the region here, over the weekend, several top European powers, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the UK, endorsed a proposal by the Arab nations, their rebuilding initiative, their $53 billion rebuild of Gaza. This has been a plan that's been endorsed by both the Palestinian Authority government in the West Bank as well as Hamas. And the Europeans are behind it as well. The Arab countries are behind it. The U.S. and Israel against it. In particular, they feel that it'll allow Hamas continued power in the region and doesn't do anything about the fact that you still have a couple million Palestinians who won't have permanent homes in Gaza for potentially 5 to 10 years as this rebuilding goes on. So we'll continue to watch this back and forth here. Trump continues to push his plan to create a Riviera of the Middle East there in Gaza and continue to nudge them in a direction that the Americans will accept.
From Wired, the U.S. Justice Department is trying to break up Google by telling the company to make several moves, including selling its Chrome browser. The DOJ and a coalition of 38 state attorneys filed a proposal Friday telling Google it must fully divest from Chrome and also stop paying other tech companies to make its search engine the default option on phones and other devices. That follows a federal judge ruling last year that Google was guilty of monopolistic behaviors. The Justice Department is now making these recommendations for a judge to rule this summer on what Google needs to do next. The Trump administration filing calls Google an economic Goliath and accuses it of denying users the basic American value of, quote, the ability to choose in the marketplace. Another demand from the filing is that Google hand over years of data they earned from dominating the market to search engines like Bing and DuckDuckGo that have suffered from their monopoly.
Yeah, so the judge found last year that Google, in dominating 90% of the search market, has made competition effectively impossible. That wasn't solely due to Google being great, but Google basically rigging the system. Because keep in mind, you have Google, the search engine, right? And then you have browsers like Chrome. And what Google, the search engine, does is then lock in beyond its own Chrome browser, lock in Firefox, lock in Safari. Most people probably don't even know that the default on your iPhone when you go to Safari and you search is Google. And so the argument by both the Trump administration, which started this case back during the first term, and Biden, one of these rare situations where Trump and Biden agree, was that this is too much. And it has effectively ensured that when we search our most private things, health, politics, the variety of things that you search on Google, you share a lot of your most private things you probably don't even share with your family with Google, that you're getting one answer. It's cooking one algorithm. And so they're arguing that there needs to be choice here. And that Google, by paying tens of billions of dollars to Apple, Mozilla, Samsung, and those companies, effectively locked all these search engines out. And some people responded, by the way, over the weekend, Jill, well, Google's the best search engine. When I try these others, they're not as good. Well, they're not as good because there's not enough people using them. Search engines get good by use. And the fact that these search engines just couldn't break through to the market because Google locked things up was part of the problem. And that's why you have part of the remedy here being that Google has to share their data that they've gleaned over the last few years with the competitors. Now, Google, of course, pushes back saying they did nothing illegal here. They've been totally fair. That the reason they have 90% of the market is because they're the best. And so we'll continue to see this fight unfold. But an interesting development there on Friday. And just given the fact that probably everyone who listens will search something online today, and most of you will use Google, we thought an interesting story that you should be tracking.
From Politico, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is planning to meet with the leaders of top food brands today, including executives from General Mills and PepsiCo. These are companies that RFK has publicly accused of harming children's health and exacerbating chronic illnesses. During his Senate confirmation hearing for the health secretary position, he blamed highly processed foods from big conglomerates for poisoning the American people as part of RFK's Make America Healthy Again initiative. He's called for eliminating seed oils and banning certain food additives, which has raised alarm across the industry. The meeting is part of a White House push for cabinet secretaries to meet with leaders in the industries that they oversee.
So what's interesting is that every 5 years, the U.S. government rewrites dietary guidelines, like how much meat you should be getting, how much vegetables, etc. And so we're at that 5-year mark here. HHS, Health and Human Services, and the Agriculture Department have a unique opportunity this year to basically declare what's healthy and what's not. And it's a powerful tool that has the power to sway nutritional advice that you might get from your doctor, school lunches as well. The dietary guidelines determine that famous food pyramid, which is taught in schools, hung all over the place. But who also determines that? The lobbyists for various food brands have been pushing certain things for years. So this will be very interesting. And given the transparency that RFK Jr. promises here, it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. And this is one of the big reasons why some people got behind RFK. And then when RFK endorsed Trump, went to Trump, the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement, in regards to ultra-processed foods, additives. Now, he doesn't have that much oversight over it. A lot of it, when it comes to what's in our food, falls on the Agriculture Department. So he'll likely be working with the cabinet secretary over there, Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Agriculture, on that issue. While we're on Health and Human Services, we should note, big story came out over the weekend. On Friday, most of the 80,000 federal workers responsible for doing a variety of things at HHS, researching diseases, inspecting food, administering Medicare, Medicaid, were all emailed and offered to leave their job for $25,000. This is the latest attempt to cut down on the federal workforce. Workers at HHS have until Friday to submit a response to this voluntary separation offer. Now, HHS is one of the government's costliest federal agencies, an annual budget of close to $2 trillion. So it almost covers about 25% of the overall federal budget every year. Most of that is Medicare and Medicaid. But this will be very interesting to see who takes this and what's next if people don't take this. RFK has been promising major cuts there. But again, we're talking about agencies that are in charge of some really sensitive things that impact our health and diseases. We're talking about HHS oversees CDC, FDA, NIH, and a bunch of those agencies. So we'll closely watch to see what's unfolding there.
From CBS News, investigators now have a cause of death for actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. Hackman, who was 95, died from heart disease complicated by advanced Alzheimer's. And that happened a week after his wife, 65-year-old Arakawa, died from the effects of Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. It is a rare respiratory illness transmitted to humans through contact with rodent droppings. New Mexico authorities announced the findings from their autopsies on Friday. The couple was found dead on February 26th in their Santa Fe, New Mexico home, 8 days after Hackman's pacemaker stopped recording activity. Arakawa was last seen 7 days before that, leading authorities to believe that she died around February 11th. The autopsy also revealed that Hackman was suffering from advanced Alzheimer's.
So this is a very sad situation. It appears based on the evidence here, the fact that she died first, he died 7 days later. She was his main caretaker. He didn't have an outside caretaker. That with advanced Alzheimer's, he just was sort of aimless in the house there after she passed there. He was discovered in a separate room. Likely, as they talk about cause of death here, she was the person administering his meds. And so when she passed from that rare disease there from mouse droppings, he wasn't getting the pills that he normally takes for his heart condition there at 95 years old. And given he was having advanced Alzheimer's, not clear he was able to take care of himself there. It's just a very sad situation. Certainly people still suspicious of what may have happened there. But now that we know the dates of death and the reasons, it starts to make a little bit more sense as to what took place and why they were found in the condition they were.
And finally, a story that you have been getting a lot of comments about, Moshe, over on the Instagram account. Hasbro announced a new version of Monopoly that replaces its signature cash with a mobile banking app that handles all of the game's transactions. It is called Monopoly App Banking, where a smartphone or tablet takes over the role of banker and then keeps track of every player's money or properties. Hasbro says the new version will speed up what can often be a long game to play. Monopoly App Banking is expected to be available from most major retailers starting in August of 2025. It'll sell for about $25. The mobile app, by the way, is free.
Jill, when's the last time you played Monopoly?
Not since I was a kid, but I feel like I see people playing it all the time, like the original with the board and
the thimble.
I don't know. Yeah.
And the dog. So a lot of controversy here, but mainly just people really upset about this development. Now, we should note at the outset that Monopoly, the maker of Monopoly, says they will continue to sell the original version as well. But the people who play Monopoly, frustrated by the mobile app version, saying that this is a great way to teach kids math. You also, have people who say it's a great alternative to screen time. Like the point of a board game is to get kids away from screen time. So the fact that everyone's holding an iPhone with the app and it's doing all the math for you, it doesn't help you with alternatives to screen time there.
It kind of defeats the purpose.
And you have people who are like, how am I supposed to cheat as by being the banker and steal other people's money if the app is tracking me? That's the third criticism of this.
Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
What's the point of volunteering to be the banker when now the app does the banking for you? So that's where we're at. Again, I see the point there. We should note you will still have the option of original Monopoly. But if you want this like new 2025 high-tech Monopoly, apparently it'll be available this summer. All right, on this day in history, your clue, you have to really be like a nerd who really knew everything about the invention of the telephone, because that was the clue. Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you. Those are the first words uttered by Alexander Graham Bell in the first telephone call that he made on this day in 1876 to his assistant, Thomas Watson, who was in the next door room. I can see if some of you thought it was a Sherlock Holmes thing, my dear Watson. But in this case, this Watson is Thomas Watson, Alexander Graham Bell's assistant. Bell was 29 at the time. He invented the telephone. He wrote to his father of his great success, speculated that the day is coming when telegraph wires will be laid onto houses just like water and gas, and friends will converse with each other without having to leave their homes. People at the time were like, that's crazy.
What would they think of FaceTime?
Bell was on it 150 years ago. And so there you have it. By the way, it wasn't just the phone. He was into a number of inventions. He apparently developed his own flying machine after the Wright brothers. He also was trying to desperately invent a metal detector. That's when President James Garfield, many of you might not remember James Garfield. He was a president for like a short bit. He was assassinated. They were trying to help him. He was actually alive for several weeks after he got shot. And so Alexander Graham Bell was trying to invent a metal detector to try to find the bullet inside the president's body. Sadly, not successful. All right, fast forward to this day in 1969, James Earl Ray pled guilty today to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. James Earl Ray that day admitting that he was the shooter on April 4th, 1968, and killed the civil rights leader. He would then escape to Canada and England before being arrested several months later. There was a several-month international manhunt to find MLK's assassin. Ray is brought back. And instead of going on trial and potentially facing the electric chair, he decides to plead guilty and gets sentenced to 99 years in prison. He would eventually die in prison several decades later. But then within days of his plea, Ray said, "I was coerced by my attorney. I did not kill MLK Jr." And so he suggested there was a larger plot there involving the U.S. government. And so he actually tried to rescind that multiple times. Judges never approved of it, though we should note that the Martin Luther King family has, for the most part, nearly all of them, agreed that Ray was framed, and we don't know who actually killed Martin Luther King, that James Earl Ray was just in the words of actually a different guy who said he was framed, Lee Harvey Oswald, a patsy. On this day in baked goods history, Jill, 50 years ago today, Wally Amos opened his first famous Amos cookie store on Sunset Boulevard in LA. And we end with music history, as always. On this day in 1979, disco queen Gloria Gaynor topped the Billboard charts with "I Will Survive."
Moshe, I feel like that's appropriate for International Women's Day.
Yes, though you'll like this backstory to it. It's a female empowerment song written by two men.
Wah, wah.
Wah, wah. It was sung by Gloria, though. All right, and on this day in 2015, you might recognize that hit. That is Blurred Lines by Robin Thicke. On this day, a jury found that the Blurred Lines song was too similar to a hit by Marvin Gaye in 1977 called "Got to Give It Up." So a jury awarded Marvin Gaye's family, his estate, more than $7 million for Robin Thicke's violation. But I have to say, if you're at a wedding these days, as you're taking in your appetizer, you're probably hearing Blurred Lines, right? Unless the couple has decided to like ban the DJ or the band from playing it.
At my wedding, my husband had a do not play list.
Yes.
That he told the band, he's like, "These are the songs you may not play at the wedding." Blurred Lines, not one of them.
Oh, so was Blurred Lines played at your wedding? Do you know?
I don't remember. I don't think so. But it was more for just like some of the 70s hits, I think, that are still making the wedding circuit.
I got you. There's a few. I feel like in terms of like popular wedding music, there's like "Marry You" by Bruno Mars, "All of Me," John Legend. There's songs that are pretty standard operating procedure unless you tell them again not to play it. Let me know what was on the band list, Michael's band list. I'm curious. Was the YMCA?
No, but they didn't play it at the wedding.
Got
Who would have thought YMCA having such a resurgence in Trump Part 2? All right, thank you guys for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.